Chapter 12 of The Life of the Spider by Jean-Henri Fabre. Translated by Alexander de Matos. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Scott Carpenter. The Life of the Spider. Translated by Alexander de Matos. Chapter 12. The Garden Spiders. The Telegraph Wire. Of the 6 garden spiders that form the object of my observations, 2 only, the banded and the silky Epeira, remain constantly in their webs, even under the blinding rays of a fierce sun. The others, as a rule, do not show themselves until nightfall. At some distance from the net, they have a rough and ready retreat in the brambles, an ambush made of a few leaves held together by stretched threads. It is here that, for the most part, they remain in the daytime, motionless and sunk in meditation. But the shrill light that vexes them is the joy of the fields. At such times, the locust hops more nimbly than ever, more gaily skims the dragonfly. Besides, the limy web, despite the rents suffered during the night, is still in serviceable condition. If some giddy pate allow himself to be caught, will the spider, at the distance whereto she has retired, be unable to take advantage of the windfall? Never fear. She arrives in a flash. How is she apprised? Let us explain the matter. The alarm is given by the vibration of the web, much more than by the sight of the captured object. A very simple experiment will prove this. I lay upon a banded Epeira's lime threads a locust, that second asphyxiated with carbon disulfide. The carcass is placed in front, or behind, or at either side of the spider, who sits moveless in the center of the net. If the test is to be applied to a species with a daytime hiding place amid the foliage, the dead locust is laid on the web, more or less near the center, no matter how. In both cases, nothing happens at first. The Epeira remains in her motionless attitude even when the morsel is at a short distance in front of her. She is indifferent to the presence of the game, does not seem to perceive it, so much that she ends by wearing out my patience. Then, with a long straw, which enables me to conceal myself slightly, I set the dead insect trembling. That is quite enough. The banded Epeira and the silky Epeira hasten to the central floor, the others come down from the branch. All go to the locust, swathe him with tape, treat him, in short, as they would treat a live prey captured under normal conditions. It took the shaking of the web to decide them to attack. Perhaps the grey color of the locust is not sufficiently conspicuous to attract attention by itself. Then let us try red, the brightest color to our retina, and probably also to the spiders. None of the game hunted by the Epeirae being clad in scarlet, I make a small bundle out of red wool, a bait of the size of a locust. I glue it to the web. My stratagem succeeds. As long as the parcel is stationary, the spider is not roused, but the moment it trembles, stirred by my straw, she runs up eagerly. There are silly ones who just touch the thing with their legs, and, without further enquiries, swathe it in silk after the manner of the usual game. They even go so far as to dig their fangs into the bait, following the rule of the preliminary poisoning. Then, and then only, the mistake is recognized, and the tricked spider retires and does not come back, unless it be long afterwards, when she flings the cumbersome object out of the web. There are also clever ones. Like the others, these hasten to the red woolen lure, which my straw insidiously keeps moving. They come from their tent among the leaves as readily as from the center of the web. They explore it with their palpi and their legs, but, soon perceiving that the thing is valueless, they are careful not to spend their silk on useless bonds. My quivering bait does not deceive them. It is flung out after a brief inspection. Still, the clever ones, like the silly ones, run even from a distance from their leafy ambush. How do they know? Certainly not by sight. Before recognizing their mistake, they have to hold the object between their legs, and even to nibble at it a little. They are extremely short-sighted. At a hand's breadth's distance, the lifeless prey, unable to shake the web, remains unperceived. Besides, in many cases, the hunting takes place in the dense darkness of the night, when sight, even if it were good, would not avail. If the eyes are sufficient guides, even close at hand, how will it be when the prey has to be spied from afar? In that case, an intelligence apparatus for long-distance work becomes indispensable. We have no difficulty in detecting the apparatus. Let us look attentively behind the web of any Epeira with a daytime hiding place. We shall see a thread that starts from the center of the network, ascends in a slanting line outside the plane of the web, and ends at the ambush where the Spider lurks all day. Except at the central point, there is no connection between this thread and the rest of the work, no interweaving with the scaffolding threads. Free of impediment, the line runs straight from the center of the net to the ambush tent. Its length averages 22 inches. The angular Epeira, settled high up in the trees, has shown me some as long as 8 or 9 feet. There is no doubt that this slanting line is a footbridge, which allows the Spider to repair hurriedly to the web, when summoned by urgent business, and then, when her round is finished, to return to her hut. In fact, it is the road which I see her follow in going and coming. But is that all? No, for if the Epeira had no aim in view, but a means of rapid transit between her tent and the net, the footbridge would be fastened to the upper edge of the web. The journey would be shorter and the slope less steep. Why, moreover, does this line always start in the center of the sticky network and nowhere else? Because that is the point where the spokes meet and therefore the common center of vibration. Anything that moves upon the web sets its shaking. All then that is needed is a thread issuing from this central point to convey to a distance the news of a prey struggling in some part or other of the net. The slanting cord extending outside the plane of the web is more than a footbridge. It is above all a signaling apparatus, a telegraph wire. Let us try experiment. I place a locust on the network. Caught in the sticky toils, he plunges about. Forthwith the Spider issues impetuously from her hut, comes down the footbridge, makes a rush for the locust, wraps him up and operates on him according to rule. Soon after she hoists him, fastened by a line to her spinneret, and drags him to her hiding place, where a long banquet will be held. So far nothing new. Things happen as usual. I leave the Spider to mind her own affairs for some days before I interfere with her. Again I propose to give her a locust, but this time I first cut the signaling thread with a touch of the scissors, without shaking any part of the edifice. The game is then laid on the web. Complete success. The entangled insect struggles, sets the net quivering. The Spider on her side does not stir, as though heedless of events. The idea might occur to one that in this business the Epeira stays motionless in her cabin, since she is prevented from hurrying down because the footbridge is broken. Let us undeceive ourselves. For one road open to her there are 100, all ready to bring her to the place where her presence is now required. The network is fastened to the branches by a host of lines, all of them very easy to cross. Well, the Epeira embarks upon none of them, but remains moveless and self-absorbed. Why? Because her telegraph, being out of order, no longer tells her of the shaking of the web. The captured prey is too far off for her to see it. She is all unwitting. A good hour passes, with the locust still kicking, the Spider impassive, myself watching. Nevertheless, in the end, the Epeira wakes up, no longer feeling the signaling thread, broken by my scissors. As taut as usual under her legs, she comes to look into the state of things. The web is reached without the least difficulty by one of the lines of the framework, the first that offers. The locust is then perceived and forthwith unswathed, after which the signaling thread is remade, taking the place of the one which I have broken. Along this road the Spider goes home, dragging her prey behind her. My neighbor, the mighty angular Epeira, with her telegraph wire 9 feet long, has even better things in store for me. One morning I find her web, which is now deserted, almost intact, a proof that the night's hunting has not been good. The animal must be hungry. With a piece of game for a bait, I hope to bring her down from her lofty retreat. I entangle in the web a rare morsel, a dragonfly, who struggles desperately and sets the whole net a-shaking. The other, up above, leaves her lurking place amid the cypress foliage, strides swiftly down along her telegraph wire, comes to the dragonfly, trusses her, and at once climbs home again by the same road, with her prize dangling at her heels by a thread. The final sacrifice will take place in the quiet of the leafy sanctuary. A few days later I renew my experiment under the same conditions, but this time I first cut the signaling thread. In vain I select a large dragonfly, a very restless prisoner. In vain I exert my patience. The Spider does not come down all day. Her telegraph being broken, she receives no notice of what is happening 9 feet below. The entangled morsel remains where it lies, not despised but unknown. At nightfall the Epeira leaves her cabin, passes over the ruins of her web, finds the dragonfly and eats her on the spot, after which the net is renewed. One of the Epeirae whom I have had the opportunity of examining simplifies the system, while retaining the essential mechanism of a transmission thread. This is the crater Epeira (Epeira cratera), a species seen in spring, at which time she indulges especially in the chase of the domestic bee upon the flowering rosemaries. At the leafy end of a branch she builds a sort of silken shell, the shape and size of an acorn cup. This is where she sits, with her paunch contained in the round cavity and her forelegs resting on the ledge, ready to leap. The lazy creature loves this position and rarely stations herself head downwards on the web, as do the others. Cosily ensconced in the hollow of her cup, she awaits the approaching game. Her web, which is vertical, as is the rule among the Epeirae, is of a fair size and always very near the bowl wherein the Spider takes her ease. Moreover, it touches the bowl by means of an angular extension, and the angle always contains one spoke which the Epeira, seated, so to speak, in her crater, has constantly under her legs. This spoke, springing from the common focus of the vibrations from all parts of the network, is eminently fitted to keep the Spider informed of whatsoever happens. It has a double office. It forms part of the Catherine wheel supporting the lime threads, and it warns the Epeira by its vibrations. A special thread is here superfluous. The other snarers, on the contrary, who occupy a distant retreat by day, cannot do without a private wire that keeps them in permanent communication with the deserted web. All of them have one, in point of fact, but only when age comes, age prone to rest and to long slumbers. In their youth, the Epeirae, who are then very wide awake, know nothing of the art of telegraphy. Besides, their web, a short-lived work whereof hardly a trace remains on the morrow, does not allow of this kind of industry. It is no use going to the expense of a signalling apparatus for a ruined snare wherein nothing can now be caught. Only the old Spiders, meditating or dozing in their green tent, are warned from afar, by telegraph, of what takes place on the web. To save herself from keeping a close watch that would degenerate into drudgery and to remain alive to events even when resting, with her back turned on the net, the ambushed Spider always has her foot upon the telegraph wire. Of my observations on this subject, let me relate the following, which will be sufficient for our purpose. An angular Epeira, with a remarkably fine belly, has spun her web between two laurestine shrubs, covering a width of nearly a yard. The sun beats upon the snare, which is abandoned long before dawn. The Spider is in her day manor, a resort easily discovered by following the telegraph wire. It is a vaulted chamber of dead leaves, joined together with a few bits of silk. The refuge is deep. The Spider disappears in it entirely, all but her rounded hindquarters, which bar the entrance to the donjon. With her front half plunged into the back of her hut, the Epeira certainly cannot see her web. Even if she had good sight instead of being purblind, her position could not possibly allow her to keep the prey in view. Does she give up hunting during this period of bright sunlight? Not at all. Look again. Wonderful, one of her hind legs is stretched outside the leafy cabin, and the signalling thread ends just at the tip of that leg. Whoso has not seen the Epeira in this attitude, with her hand, so to speak, on the telegraph receiver, knows nothing of one of the most curious instances of animal cleverness. Let any game appear upon the scene, and the slumberer forthwith, aroused by means of the leg perceiving the vibrations, hastens up. A locust whom I myself lay on the web procures her this agreeable shock and what follows. If she is satisfied with her bag, I am still more satisfied with what I have learnt. The occasion is too good not to find out, under better conditions as regards approach, what the inhabitant of the cypress trees has already shown me. The next morning I cut the telegraph wire, this time as long as one's arm and held, like yesterday, by one of the hind legs stretched outside the cabin. I then place on the web a double prey, a dragonfly and a locust. The latter kicks out with his long spurred shanks, the other flutters her wings. The web is tossed about to such an extent that a number of leaves just beside the Epeira's nest move shaken by the threads of the framework affixed to them. And this vibration, though so close at hand, does not rouse the Spider in the least, does not make her even turn round to inquire what is going on. The moment that her signalling thread ceases to work, she knows nothing of passing events. All day long she remains without stirring. In the evening, at 8 o'clock, she sallies forth to weave the new web, and at last finds the rich windfall whereof she was hitherto unaware. One word more. The web is often shaken by the wind. The different parts of the framework, tossed and teased by the eddying air currents, cannot fail to transmit their vibration to the signalling thread. Nevertheless, the Spider does not quit her hut, and remains indifferent to the commotion prevailing in the net. Her line, therefore, is something better than a bell rope that pulls and communicates the impulse given. It is a telephone capable, like our own, of transmitting infinitesimal waves of sound. Clutching her telephone wire with a toe, the Spider listens with her leg. She perceives the innermost vibrations. She distinguishes between the vibration proceeding from a prisoner and the mere shaking caused by the wind. End of chapter 12.
Chapter 13 of The Life of the Spider. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Life of the Spider by Jean-Henri Fabre. Translated by Alexander de Matos. Chapter 13. The Garden Spiders. Pairing and Hunting. Notwithstanding the importance of this subject, I shall not enlarge upon the nuptials of the Epeira, grim natures whose loves easily turn to tragedy in the mystery of the night. I have but once been present at the pairing, and for this curious experience I must thank my lucky star and my fat neighbor, the angular Epeira, whom I visit so often by lantern light. Here you have it. It is the first week of August, at about 9 o'clock in the evening, under a perfect sky in calm, hot weather. The Spider has not yet constructed her web and is sitting motionless on her suspension cable. The fact that she should be slacking like this at a time when her building operations ought to be in full swing naturally astonishes me. Can something unusual be afoot? Even so, I see hastening up from the neighboring bushes and embarking on the cable a male, a dwarf, who is coming, the whippersnapper, to pay his respects to the portly giantess. How has he, in his distant corner, heard of the presence of the nymph ripe for marriage? Among the spiders, these things are learnt in the silence of the night, without a summons, without a signal, none knows how. Once the great peacock, apprised by the magic effluvia, used to come from miles around to visit the recluse in her bell jar in my study. The dwarf of this evening, that other nocturnal pilgrim, crosses the intricate tangle of the branches without a mistake and makes a straight for the rope walker. He has as his guide the infallible compass that brings every Jack and his Jill together. He climbs the slope of the suspension cord. He advances circumspectly, step by step. He stops some distance away, irresolute. Shall he go closer? Is this the right moment? No. The other lifts a limb, and the scared visitor hurries down again. Recovering from his fright, he climbs up once more, draws a little nearer. More sudden flights, followed by fresh approaches, each time nigher than before. This restless running to and fro is the declaration of the enamoured swain. Perseverance spells success. The pair are now face to face. She is motionless and grave, he all excitement. With the tip of his leg, he ventures to touch the plump wench. He has gone too far, daring youth that he is. Panic-stricken, he takes a header hanging by his safety line. It is only for a moment, however. Up he comes again. He has learnt from certain symptoms that we are at last yielding to his blandishments. With his legs, and specially with his palpi or feelers, he teases the buxom gossip, who answers with curious skips and bounds. Gripping a thread with her front tarsi or fingers, she turns, one after the other, a number of back somersaults, like those of an acrobat on the trapeze. Having done this, she presents the under part of her paunch to the dwarf and allows him to fumble at it a little with his feelers. Nothing more. It is done. The object of the expedition is attained. The whippersnapper makes off at full speed, as though he had the Furies at his heels. If he remained, he would presumably be eaten. These exercises on the tightrope are not repeated. I kept watch in vain on the following evenings. I never saw the fellow again. When he is gone, the bride descends from the cable, spins her web, and assumes the hunting attitude. We must eat to have silk. We must have silk to eat, and especially to weave the expensive cocoon of the family. There is therefore no rest, not even after the excitement of being married. The Epeira are monuments of patience in their lime snare. With her head down and her 8 legs widespread, the Spider occupies the center of the web, the receiving point of information sent along the spokes. If anywhere, behind or before, a vibration occur, the sign of a capture, the Epeira knows about it, even without the aid of sight. She hastens up at once. Until then, not a moment one would think that the animal was hypnotized by her watching. At most, on the appearance of anything suspicious, she begins shaking her nest. This is her way of inspiring the intruder with awe. If I myself wish to provoke the singular alarm, I would have but to tease the Epeira with a bit of straw. You cannot have a swing without an impulse of some sort. The terror-stricken Spider, who wishes to strike terror into others, has hit upon something much better. With nothing to push her, she swings with her floor of ropes. There is no effort, no visible exertion. Not a single part of the animal moves, and yet everything trembles. Violent shaking proceeds from apparent inertia. Rest causes commotion. When calm is restored, she resumes her attitude, ceaselessly pondering the harsh problem of life. Shall I dine today or not? Certain privileged beings, exempt from those anxieties, have food in abundance and need not struggle to obtain it. Such is the Gentle, who swims blissfully in the broth of the putrefying adder. Others, and by a strange irony of fate, these are generally the most gifted, only manage to eat by dint of craft and patience. You are of their company, O my industrious Epeira. So that you may dine, you spend your treasures of patience nightly and often without result. I sympathize with your woes, for I, who am as concerned as you about my daily bread, I also doggedly spread my net, the net for catching ideas, a more elusive and less substantial prize than the moth. Let us not lose heart. The best part of life is not in the present, still less in the past. It lies in the future. the domain of hope. Let us wait. All day long, the sky of a uniform grey has appeared to be brewing a storm. In spite of the threatened downpour, my neighbour, who is shrewd weather prophet, has come out of the cypress tree and begun to renew her web at the regular hour. Her forecast is correct. It will be a fine night. See, the streaming pan of cloud splits open, and through the apertures the moon peeps inquisitively. I too, lantern in hand, am peeping. A gust of wind from the north clears the realms on high, the sky becomes magnificent, perfect calm reigns below. The moths begin their nightly rounds. Good, one is caught, a mighty fine one. The spider will dine today. What happens next in an uncertain light does not lend itself to accurate observation. It is better to turn to those garden spiders who never leave their web and who hunt mainly in the daytime. The banded and the silky Epeira, both of whom live on the rosemaries in the enclosure, shall show us in broad daylight the innermost details of the tragedy. I myself place on the lime snare a victim of my selecting. Its 6 legs are caught without much ado. If the insect raises one of its tarsi and pulls towards itself, the treacherous thread follows, unwinding slightly and, without letting go or breaking, yields to the captive's desperate jerks. Any limb released only tangles the others still more, and is speedily recaptured by the sticky matter. There is no means of escape, except by smashing the trap with a sudden effort, whereof even powerful insects are not always capable. Warned by the shaking of the net, the Epeira hastens up. She turns round about the quarry. She inspects it at a distance, so as to ascertain the degree of the danger before attacking. The strength of the snarling will decide the plan of campaign. Let us first suppose the usual case, that of an average head of game, a moth or fly of some sort. Facing her prisoner, the Spider contracts her abdomen slightly and touches the insect for a moment with the end of her spinnerets. Then, with her front tarsi, she sets her victim spinning. The squirrel, in the moving cylinder of his cage, does not display a more graceful or nimbler dexterity. A crossbar of the sticky spiral serves as an axis for the tiny machine, which turns swiftly like a spit. It is a treat to the eyes to see it revolve. What is the object of this circular motion? See, the brief contact of the spinnerets has given a starting point for a thread, which the Spider must now draw from her silk warehouse and gradually roll around the captive, so as to swathe him in a winding sheet which will overpower any effort made. It is the exact process employed in our wire mills. A motor-driven spool revolves and, by its action, draws the wire through a narrow eyelet of a steel plate, making it of the fineness required, and, with the same movement, winds it round and round its collar. Even so with the Epeira's work. The Spider's front tarsi are the motor. The revolving spool is the captured insect. The steel eyelet is the aperture of the spinnerets. To bind the subject with precision and dispatch, nothing could be better than this inexpensive and highly effective method. Less frequently, a second process is employed. With a quick movement, the Spider herself turns round about the motionless insect, crossing the web first at the top and then at the bottom, and gradually placing the fastenings of her line. The great elasticity of the line threads allow the Epeira to fling herself time after time right into the web and to pass through it without damaging the net. Let us now suppose the case of some dangerous game, a praying mantis, for instance, brandishing her lethal limbs, each hooked and fitted with a double saw, an angry hornet darting her awful sting, a sturdy beetle, invincible under his horny armor. These are exceptional morsels, hardly ever known to the Epeira. Will they be accepted if supplied by my stratagems? They are, but not without caution. The game is seen to be perilous of approach, and the Spider turns her back upon it instead of facing it. She trains her rope cannon upon it. Quickly, the hind legs draw from the spinnerets something much better than single cords. The whole silk battery works at one and the same time, firing a regular volley of ribbons and sheets, which a wide movement of the legs spreads fan-wise and flings over the entangled prisoner. Guarding against sudden starts, the Epeira casts her armful of bands on the front and hind parts, over the legs and over the wings, here, there, and everywhere extravagantly. The most fiery prey is promptly mastered under this avalanche. In vain, the mantis tries to open her saw-toothed arm guards. In vain, the hornet makes play with her dagger. In vain, the beetle stiffens his legs and arches his back. A fresh wave of threads swoops down and paralyzes every effort. These lavished, far-flung ribbons threaten to exhaust the factory. It would be much more economical to resort to the method of the spool, but to turn the machine, the Spider would have to go up to it and work it with her leg. This is too risky, and hence the continuous spray of silk at a safe distance. When all is used up, there is more to come. Still, the Epeira seems concerned at this excessive outlay. When circumstances permit, she gladly returns to the mechanism of the revolving spool. I saw her practice this abrupt change of tactics on a big beetle, with a smooth, plump body, which lent itself admirably to the rotary process. After depriving the beast of all power of movement, she went up to it and turned her corpulent victim as she would have done with a medium-sized moth. But with the praying mantis sticking out her long legs and her spreading wings, rotation is no longer feasible. Then, until the quarry is thoroughly subdued, the spray of bandages goes on continuously, even to the point of drying up the silk glands. The capture of this kind is ruinous. It is true that, except when I interfered, I have never seen the Spider tackle that formidable provender. Be it feeble or strong, the game is now neatly trussed by one of the two methods. The next move never varies. The bound insect is bitten, without persistency and without any wound that shows. The Spider next retires and allows the bite to act, which it soon does. She then returns. If the victim be small, a cloth moth, for instance, it is consumed on the spot at the place where it was captured. But for a prize of some importance, on which she hopes to feast for many an hour, sometimes for many a day, the Spider needs a sequestered dining room, where there is naught to fear from the stickiness of the network. Before going to it, she first makes her prey turn in the converse direction to that of the original rotation. Her object is to free the nearest spokes, which supply pivots for the machinery. These are essential factors which it behooves her to keep intact, if need be, by sacrificing a few crossbars. It is done. The twisted ends are put back into position. The well-trussed game is at last removed from the web and fastened on behind with a thread. The Spider then marches in front, and the load is trundled across the web and hoisted to the resting floor, which is both an inspection post and a dining hall. When the Spider is of a species that shuns the light and possesses a telegraph line, she mounts to her daytime hiding place along this line, with the game bumping against her heels. While she is refreshing herself, let us inquire into the effects of the little bite previously administered to the silk-swathed captive. Does the Spider kill the patient with a view to avoiding unseasonable jerks, protests so disagreeable at dinner time? Several reasons make me doubt it. In the first place, the attack is so much veiled as to have all the appearance of a mere kiss. Besides, it is made anywhere, at the first spot that offers. The expert slayers employ methods of the highest precision. They give a stab in the neck or under the throat. They wound the cervical nerve centers, the seat of energy. The paralyzers, those accomplished anatomists, poison the motor nerve centers, of which they know the number and position. The Epeira possesses none of this fearsome knowledge. She inserts her fang at random, as the bee does her sting. She does not select one spot rather than other. She bites indifferently at whatever comes within reach. This being so, her poison would have to possess unparalleled virulence to produce a corpse-like inertia, no matter which the point attacked. I can scarcely believe in instantaneous death resulting from the bite, especially in the case of insects with their highly resistant organisms. Besides, is it really a corpse that the Epeira wants, she who feeds on blood much more than flesh? It were to her advantage to suck a live body, wherein the flow of the liquids, set in motion by the pulsation of the dorsal vessel, that rudimentary heart of insects, must act more freely than in a lifeless body with its stagnant fluids. The game which the Spider means to suck dry might very well not be dead. This is easily ascertained. I place some locusts of different species on the webs in my menagerie. One on this, another on that. The Spider comes rushing up, binds the prey, nibbles at it gently and withdraws, waiting for the bite to take effect. I then take the insect and carefully strip it of its silken shroud. The locust is not dead. Far from it, one would even think that he had suffered no harm. I examine the released prisoner through the lens in vain. I can see no trace of a wound. Can he be unscathed in spite of the sort of kiss which I saw given to him just now? You would be ready to say so, judging by the furious way in which he kicks in my fingers. Nevertheless, when put on the ground, he walks awkwardly. He seems reluctant to hope. Perhaps it is a temporary trouble caused by his terrible excitement in the web. It looks as though it would soon pass. I lodge my locusts in cage with a lettuce leaf to console them for their trials, but they will not be comforted. A day lapses, followed by a second. Not one of them touches the leaf of salad. Their appetite has disappeared. Their movements become more uncertain, as though hampered by irresistible torpor. On the second day they are dead, every one irrecoverably dead. The Epeira, therefore, does not incontinently kill her prey with her delicate bite. She poisons it so as to produce a gradual weakness which gives the bloodsucker ample time to drain her victim without the least risk before rigor mortis stops the flow of moisture. The meal lasts quite 24 hours, if the joint be large, and to the very end the butchered insect retains a remnant of life, a favorable condition for the exhausting of the juices. Once again we see a skillful method of slaughter, very different from the tactics in use among the expert paralyzers or slayers. Here there is no display of anatomical science. Unacquainted with the patient's structure, the spider stabs at random. The virulence of the poison does the rest. There are, however, some very few cases in which the bite is speedily mortal. My notes speak of an angular Epeira grappling with the largest dragonfly in my district, Aeshna grandis, Lynn. I myself had entangled in the web this head of big game, which is not often captured by the Epeira. The net shakes violently, seems bound to break its moorings. The spider rushes from her leafy villa, runs boldly up to the giantess, flings a single bundle of ropes at her, and, without further precautions, grips her with her legs, tries to subdue her, then digs her fangs into the dragonfly's back. The bite is prolonged in such a way as to astonish me. This is not the perfunctory kiss with which I am already familiar. It is a deep, determined wound. After striking her blow, the spider retires to a certain distance and awaits for her poison to take effect. I at once remove the dragonfly. She is dead, really and truly dead. Laid upon my table and left alone for 24 hours, she makes not the slightest movement. A prick of which my lens cannot see the marks, so sharp-pointed are the Epeira's weapons, was enough, with a little insistence, to kill the powerful animal. Proportionately, the rattlesnake, the horned viper, the trigonocephalus, and other ill-famed serpents produce less paralyzing effects upon their victims. And these Epeira, so terrible to insects, I am able to handle without any fear. My skin does not suit them. If I persuaded them to bite me, what would happen to me? Hardly anything. We have more cause to dread the sting of a nettle than the dagger which is fatal to the dragonflies. The same virus acts differently upon this organism and that, is formidable here and quite mild there. What kills the insect may easily be harmless to us. Let us not, however, generalize too far. The Narbonne Lycosa, that other enthusiastic insect huntress, would make us pay clearly if we attempted to take liberties with her. It is not uninteresting to watch the Epeira at dinner. I light upon one, the banded Epeira, at the moment about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when she has captured a locust. Planted in the centre of the web, on her resting floor, she attacks the venison at the joint of a haunch. There is no movement, not even of the mouth parts, as far as I am able to discover. The mouth lingers, close applied, at the point originally bitten. There are no intermittent mouthfuls, with the mandibles moving backward and forwards. It is a sort of continuous kiss. I visit my Epeira at intervals. The mouth does not change its place. I visit her for the last time at 9 o'clock in the evening. Matters stand exactly as they did. After 6 hours' consumption, the mouth is still sucking at the lower end of the right haunch. The fluid contents of the victim are transferred to the ogress's belly, I know not how. Next morning, the spider is still at table. I take away her dish, not remains of the locust, but his skin, hardly altered in shape, but utterly drained and perforated in several places. The method, therefore, was changed during the night. To extract the non-fluent residue, the viscera and muscles, the stiff cuticle had to be tapped here, there, and elsewhere, after which the tattered husk, placed bodily in the press of the mandibles, would have been chewed, rechewed, and finally reduced to a pill, which the sated spider throws up. This would have been the end of the victim had I not taken it away before the time. Whether she wound or kill, the Epeira bites her captive somewhere or other, no matter where. This is an excellent method on her part, because of the variety of the game that comes her way. I see her accepting with equal readiness whatever chance may send her: butterflies and dragonflies, flies and wasps, small dung beetles and locusts. If I offer her a mantis, a bumblebee, an anoxia, the equivalent of the common cockchafer, and other dishes probably unknown to her race, she accepts all and any, large and small, thin-skinned and horny-skinned, that which goes afoot and that which takes winged flight. She is omnivorous. She preys on everything, down to her own kind, should the occasion offer. Had she to operate according to individual structure, she would need an anatomical dictionary, and instinct is essentially unfamiliar with generalities. Its knowledge is always confined to limited points. The sorceress knows their weevils and their buprestis beetles absolutely, the specks, their grasshoppers, their crickets, and their locusts, the scoliae, their cetonia and oricide grubs. Even so, the other paralyzers. Each has her own victim and knows nothing of any of the others. The same exclusive tastes prevail among the slayers. Let us remember in this connection Philanthus epivorus, and especially the Thomisus, the comely spider who cuts bees' throat. They understand the fatal blow, either in the neck or under the chin, a thing which the Epeira does not understand. But just because of this, they are specialists. Their province is the domestic bee. Animals are a little like ourselves. They excel in an art only on condition of specializing in it. The Epeira, who being omnivorous is obliged to generalize, abandons scientific methods and makes up for this by distilling a poison capable of producing torpor and even death, no matter what the point attacked. Recognizing the large variety of game, we wonder how the Epeira manages not to hesitate amid those many diverse forms. How, for instance, she passes from the locust to the butterfly, so different in appearance. To attribute to her as a guide an extensive zoological knowledge were wildly in excess of what we may reasonably expect of her poor intelligence. The thing moves, therefore it is worth catching. This formula seems to sum up the spider's wisdom. End of chapter.
Chapter 14 of The Life of the Spider. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Scott Carpenter. The Life of the Spider by Jean-Henri Fabre. Translated by Alexander de Matos. Chapter 14. The Garden Spiders. The Question of Property. A dog has found a bone. He lies in the shade, holding it between his paws, and studies it fondly. It is his sacred property, his chattel. An Epeira has woven her web. Here again is property, and owning a better title than the other. Favoured by chance and assisted by his scent, the dog has merely had a find. He has neither worked nor paid for it. The spider is more than a casual owner. She has created what is hers. Its substance issued from her body, its structure from her brain. If ever property was sacrosanct, hers is. Far higher stands the work of the weaver of ideas, who tissues a book, that other spider's web, and out of his thought makes something that shall instruct or thrill us. To protect our bone we have the police, invented for the express purpose. To protect the book we have none but farcical means. Place a few bricks one atop the other, join them with mortar, and the law will defend your wall. Build up in writing an edifice of your thoughts, and it will be open to anyone, without serious impediment, to abstract stones from it, even to take the whole if it suit him. A rabbit hutch is property, the work of the mind is not. If the animal has eccentric views as regards the possessions of others, we have ours as well. Might always has the best of the argument, said La Fontaine, to the great scandal of the peace lovers. The exigencies of verse, rhyme, and rhythm carried the worthy fabulist further than he intended. He meant to say that in a fight between mastiffs and in other brute conflicts the stronger is left master of the bone. He well knew that, as things go, success is no certificate of excellence. Others came, the notorious evil-doers of humanity, who made a law of the savage maxim that might is right. We are the larvae with the changing skins, the ugly caterpillars of a society that is slowly, very slowly, wending its way to the triumph of right over might. When will this sublime metamorphosis be accomplished? To free ourselves from those wild beast brutalities, must we wait for the ocean plains of the southern hemisphere to flow to our side, changing the face of continents, and renewing the glacial period of the reindeer and the mammoth? Perhaps. So slow is moral progress. True, we have the bicycle, the motor car, the dirigible airship, and other marvelous means of breaking our bones. But our morality is not one rung the higher for it all. One would even say that the farther we proceed in our conquest of matter, the more our morality recedes. The most advanced of our inventions consists in bringing men down with grape shot and explosives with the swiftness of the reaper mowing the corn. Would we see this might triumphant in all its beauty? Let us spend a few weeks in the Epeira's company. She is the owner of a web, her work, her most lawful property. The question at once presents itself. Does the Spider possibly recognize her fabric by certain trademarks and distinguish it from that of her fellows? I bring about a change of webs between two neighboring banded Epeirae. No sooner is either placed upon the strange net than she makes for the central floor, settles herself head downwards, and does not stir from it, satisfied with her neighbour's web as with her own. Neither by day nor night does she try to shift her quarters and restore matters to their pristine state. Both Spiders think themselves in their own domain. The two pieces of work are so much alike that I almost expected this. I then decide to effect an exchange of webs between two different species. I move the banded Epeira to the net of the silky Epeira, and vice versa. The two webs are now dissimilar. The silky Epeira's has a limy spiral consisting of closer and more numerous circles. What will the Spiders do when thus put to the test of the unknown? One would think that when one of them found meshes too wide for her under her feet, the other meshes too narrow, they would be frightened by this sudden change and decamp in terror. Not at all. Without a sign of perturbation they remain, plant themselves in the centre, and await the coming of the game, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. They do more than this. Days pass, and as long as the unfamiliar web is not wrecked to the extent of being unserviceable, they make no attempt to weave another in their own style. The Spider, therefore, is incapable of recognizing her web. She takes another's work for hers, even when it is produced by a stranger to her race. We now come to the tragic side of this confusion. Wishing to have subjects for study within my daily reach, and to save myself the trouble of casual excursions, I collect different Epeirae, whom I find in the course of my walks, and establish them on the shrubs in my enclosure. In this way, a rosemary hedge, sheltered from the wind and facing the sun, is turned into a well-stocked menagerie. I take the Spiders from the paper bags wherein I had put them separately, to carry them, and place them on the leaves with no further precaution. It is for them to make themselves at home. As a rule, they do not budge all day from the place where I put them. They wait for nightfall before seeking a suitable site whereon to weave a net. Some among them show less patience. A little while ago they possessed a web between the reeds of a brook or in the holm oak copses, and now they have none. They go off in search to recover their property or seize on someone else's. It is all the same to them. I come upon a banded Epeira, newly imported, making for the web of a silky Epeira who has been my guest for some days now. The owner is at her post, in the centre of the net. She awaits the stranger with seeming impassiveness. Then suddenly they grip each other, and a desperate fight begins. The silky Epeira is worsted. The other swathes her in bonds, drags her to the non-limy central floor, and in the calmest fashion eats her. The dead Spider is munched for 24 hours and drained to the last drop, when the corpse, a wretched crumpled ball, is at last flung aside. The web so foully conquered becomes the property of the stranger, who uses it, if it have not suffered too much in the contest. There is here a shadow of an excuse. The two Spiders were of different species, and the struggle for life often leads to these exterminations among such as are not akin. What would happen if the two belonged to the same species? It is easily seen. I cannot rely upon spontaneous invasions, which may be rare under normal conditions, and I myself place a banded Epeira on her kinswoman's web. A furious attack is made forthwith. Victory, after hanging for a moment in the balance, is once again decided in the stranger's favour. The vanquished party, this time a sister, is eaten without the slightest scruple. Her web becomes the property of the victor. There it is in all its horror, the right of might, to eat one's like and take away their goods. Man did the same in days of old. He stripped and ate his fellows. We continue to rob one another, both as nations and as individuals, but we no longer eat one another. The custom has grown obsolete, since we discovered an acceptable substitute in the mutton chop. Let us not, however, blacken the Spider beyond her deserts. She does not live by warring on her kith and kin. She does not of her own accord attempt the conquest of another's property. It needs extraordinary circumstances to rouse her to these villainies. I take her from her web and place her on another's. From that moment she knows no distinction between meum and tuum. The thing which the leg touches at once becomes real estate. And the intruder, if she be the stronger, ends by eating the occupier, a radical means of cutting short disputes. Apart from disturbances similar to those provoked by myself, disturbances that are possible in the everlasting conflict of events, the Spider, jealous of her own web, seems to respect the webs of others. She never indulges in brigandage against her fellows except when dispossessed of her net, especially in the daytime, for weaving is never done by day. This work is reserved for the night. When, however, she is deprived of her livelihood and feels herself the stronger, then she attacks her neighbour, rips her open, feeds on her, and takes possession of her goods. Let us make allowances and proceed. We will now examine Spiders of more alien habits. The Banded and Silky Epeira differ greatly in form and colouring. The first has a plump, olive-shaped belly, richly belted with white, bright yellow, and black. The second's abdomen is flat, of a silky white, and pinked into festoons. Judging only by dress and figure, we should not think of closely connecting the two spiders. But high above shapes tower tendencies, those main characteristics which our methods of classification, so particular about minute details of form, ought to consult more widely than they do. The two dissimilar spiders have exactly similar ways of living. Both of them prefer to hunt by day and never leave their webs. Both sign their work with a zigzag flourish. Their nets are almost identical, so much so that the Banded Epeira uses the Silky Epeira's web after eating its owner. The Silky Epeira, on her side, when she is the stronger, dispossesses her belted cousin and devours her. Each is at home on the other's web, when the argument of might, triumphant, has ended the discussion. Let us take the case of the cross spider, a hairy beast of varying shades of reddish-brown. She has 3 large white spots upon her back, forming a triple-barred cross. She hunts mostly at night, shuns the sun, and lives by day on the adjacent shrubs, in a shady retreat which communicates with the lime snare by means of a telegraph wire. Her web is very similar in structure and appearance to those of the 2 others. What will happen if I procure her the visit of a Banded Epeira? The lady of the triple cross is invaded by day, in the full light of the sun, thanks to my mischievous intermediary. The web is deserted, the proprietress is in her leafy hut. The telegraph wire performs its office, the cross spider hastens down, strides all round her property, beholds the danger, and hurriedly returns to her hiding place without taking any measures against the intruder. The latter, on her side, does not seem to be enjoying herself. Were she placed on the web of one of her sisters, or even that of the Silky Epeira, she would have posted herself in the centre, as soon as the struggle had ended in the other's death. This time there is no struggle, for the web is deserted. Nothing prevents her from taking her position in the centre, the chief strategic point, and yet she does not move from the place where I put her. I tickle her gently with the tip of a long straw. When at home, if teased in this way, the Banded Epeira, like the others for that matter, violently shakes the web to intimidate the aggressor. This time nothing happens. Despite my repeated enticements, the spider does not stir a limb. It is as though she were numbed with terror. And she has reason to be. The other is watching her from her lofty loophole. This is probably not the only cause of her fright. When my straw does induce her to take a few steps, I see her lift her legs with some difficulty. She tugs a bit, drags her tarsi till she almost breaks the supporting threads. It is not the progress of an agile rope-walker. It is the hesitating gait of entangled feet. Perhaps the lime threads are stickier than in her own web. The glue is of a different quality, and her sandals are not greased to the extent which the new degree of adhesiveness would demand. Anyhow, things remain as they are for long hours on end. The Banded Epeira motionless on the edge of the web, the other lurking in her hut, both apparently most uneasy. At sunset, the lover of darkness plucks up courage. She descends from her green tent, and without troubling about the stranger, goes straight to the centre of the web, where the telegraph wire brings her. Panic-stricken at this apparition, the Banded Epeira releases herself with a jerk and disappears in the rosemary thicket. The experiment, though repeatedly renewed with different subjects, gave me no other results. Distrustful of a web dissimilar to her own, if not in structure at least in stickiness, the bold Banded Epeira shows the white feather and refuses to attack the cross spider. The latter, on her side, either does not budge from her day shelter in the foliage, or else rushes back to it after taking a hurried glance at the stranger. She here awaits the coming of the night. Under favour of the darkness, which gives her fresh courage and activity, she reappears on the scene and puts the intruder to flight by her mere presence, aided, if need be, by a cuff or two. Injured right is the victor. Morality is satisfied, but let us not congratulate the spider therefor. If the invader respects the invaded, it is because very serious reasons impel her. First, she would have to contend with an adversary ensconced in a stronghold whose ambushes are unknown to the assailant. Secondly, the web, if conquered, would be inconvenient to use because of the lime threads possessing a different degree of stickiness from those which she knows so well. To risk one's skin for a thing of doubtful value were twice foolish. The spider knows this and forbears. But let the Banded Epeira, deprived of her web, come upon that of one of her kind, or of the silky Epeira, who works her gummy twine in the same manner. Then discretion is thrown to the winds, the owner is fiercely ripped open, and possession taken of the property. Might is right, says the beast, or rather it knows no right. The animal world is a rout of appetites, acknowledging no other reign than impotence. Mankind alone, capable of emerging from the slough of the instincts, is bringing equity into being, is creating it slowly as its conception grows clearer. Out of the sacred rushlight, so flickering as yet, but gaining strength from age to age, man will make a flaming torch that will put an end, among us, to the principles of the brutes, and one day utterly change the face of society. End of chapter 14.
Chapter 15 of The Life of the Spider. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Doug Allison. The Life of the Spider by Jean-Henri Fabre, translated by Alexander de Matos. Chapter 15. The Labyrinth Spider. While the Epeirae, with their gorgeous net tapestries, are incomparable weavers, many other spiders excel in ingenious devices for filling their stomachs and leaving a lineage behind them, the two primary laws of living things. Some of them are celebrities of long-standing renown who are mentioned in all the books. Certain megalas, translator's footnote, or bird spiders, known also as the American tarantula, end of footnote, inhabit a burrow like the Narbonne lycosa, but of a perfection unknown to the brutal spider of the wastelands. The lycosa surrounds the mouth of her shaft with a simple parapet, a mere collection of tiny pebbles, sticks, and silk. The others fix a movable door to theirs, a round shutter with a hinge, a groove, and a set of bolts. When the mygale comes home, the lid drops into the groove and fits so exactly that there is no possibility of distinguishing the join. If the aggressor persist and seek to raise the trap door, the recluse pushes the bolt, that is to say, plants her claws into certain holes on the opposite side to the hinge, props herself against the wall, and holds the door firmly. Another, the Argyronida, or water spider, builds herself an elegant silken diving bell in which she stores air. Thus supplied with the wherewithal to breathe, she awaits the coming of the game and keeps herself cool meanwhile. At times of scorching heat, hers must be a regular sybaritic abode, such as eccentric man has sometimes ventured to build under water with mighty blocks of stone and marble. The submarine palaces of Tiberius are no more than an odious memory. The water spider's dainty cupola still flourishes. If I possessed documents derived from personal observation, I should like to speak of these ingenious workers. I would gladly add a few unpublished facts to their life history, but I must abandon the idea. The water spider is not found in my district. The mygale, the expert in hinged doors, is found there, but very seldom. I saw one once, on the edge of a path skirting a copse. Opportunity, as we know, is fleeting. The observer, more than any other, is obliged to take it by the forelock. Preoccupied as I was with other researches, I but gave a glance at the magnificent subject which good fortune offered. The opportunity fled, and has never returned. Let us make up for it with trivial things of frequent encounter, a condition favorable to consecutive study. What is common is not necessarily unimportant. Give it our sustained attention, and we shall discover in it merits which our former ignorance prevented us from seeing. When patiently entreated, the least of creatures adds its note to the harmonies of life. In the fields around, traversed in these days with a tired step, but still vigilantly explored, I find nothing so often as the labyrinth spider, Agelena labyrinthica. Not a hedge but shelters a few at its foot, amidst grass, in quiet, sunny nooks. In the open country, and especially in hilly places laid bare by the woodman's axe, the favorite sites are tufts of bracken, rock rose, lavender, everlasting, and rosemary cropped close by the teeth of the flocks. This is where I resort, as the isolation and kindliness of the supports lend themselves to proceedings which might not be tolerated by the unfriendly hedge. Several times a week, in July, I go to study my spiders on the spot at an early hour before the sun beats fiercely on one's neck. The children accompany me, each provided with an orange wherewith to slake the thirst that will not be slow in coming. They lend me their good eyes and supple limbs. The expedition promises to be fruitful. We soon discover high silk buildings, betrayed at a distance by the glittering threads which the dawn has converted into dewy rosaries. The children are wonderstruck at these glorious chandeliers, so much so that they forget their oranges for a moment. Nor am I, on my part, indifferent. A splendid spectacle indeed is that of our spider's labyrinth, heavy with the tears of the night, and lit up by the first rays of the sun. Accompanied, as it is, by the thrush's symphony, this alone is worth getting up for. Half an hour's heat, and the magic jewels disappear with the dew. Now is the moment to inspect their webs. Here is one spreading its sheet over a large cluster of rock roses. It is the size of a handkerchief. A profusion of guy ropes, attached to any chance projection, moor it to the brushwood. There is not a twig but supplies a contact point. Entwined on every side, surrounded and surmounted, the bush disappears from view, veiled in white muslin. The web is flat at the edges, as far as the unevenness of the support permits, and gradually hollows into a crater not unlike the bell of a hunting horn. The central portion is a cone-shaped gulf, a funnel whose neck, narrowing by degrees, dives perpendicularly into the leafy thicket to a depth of 8 or 9 inches. At the entrance to the tube, in the gloom of that murderous alley, sits the spider, who looks at us and betrays no great excitement at our presence. She is gray, modestly adorned on the thorax with 2 black ribbons, and on the abdomen with 2 stripes in which white specks alternate with brown. At the tip of the belly, 2 small mobile appendages form a sort of tail, a rather curious feature in a spider. The crater-shaped web is not of the same structure throughout. At the borders, it is a gossamer weft of sparse threads. Nearer the center, the luxury becomes first fine muslin and then satin. Lower still, on the narrower part of the opening, it is a network of rushly lozenged meshes. Lastly, the neck of the funnel, the usual resting place, is formed of solid silk. The spider never ceases working at her carpet, which represents her investigation platform. Every night she goes to it, walks over it, inspecting her snares, extending her domain, and increasing it with new threads. The work is done with the silk constantly hanging from the spinnerets and constantly extracted as the animal moves about. The neck of the funnel, being more often walked upon than the rest of the dwelling, is therefore provided with a thicker upholstery. Beyond it are the slopes of the crater, which are also much frequented regions. Spokes of some regularity fix the diameter of the mouth. A swaying walk and the guiding aid of the caudal appendages have laid lozengy meshes across these spokes. This part has been strengthened by the nightly rounds of inspection. Lastly come the less visited expanses, which consequently have a thinner carpet. At the bottom of the passage, dipping into the brushwood, we might expect to find a secret cabin, a wadded cell where the Spider would take refuge in her hours of leisure. The reality is something entirely different. The long funnel neck gapes at its lower end, where a private door stands, always ajar, allowing the animal, when hard pushed, to escape through the grass and gain the open. It is well to know this arrangement of the home, if you wish to capture the Spider without hurting her. When attacked from the front, the fugitive runs down and slips through the postern gate at the bottom. To look for her by rummaging in the brushwood often leads to nothing, so swift is her flight. Besides, a blind search entails a great risk of maiming her. Let us eschew violence, which is but seldom successful, and resort to craft. We catch sight of the Spider at the entrance to her tube. If practicable, squeeze the bottom of the tuft containing the neck of the funnel with both hands. That is enough. The animal is caught. Feeling its retreat cut off, it readily darts into the paper bag held out to it. If necessary, it can be stimulated with a bit of straw. In this way, I fill my cages with subjects that have not been demoralized by contusions. The surface of the crater is not exactly a snare. It is just possible for the casual pedestrian to catch his legs in the silky carpets. But giddy pates who come here for a walk must be very rare. What is wanted is a trap capable of securing the game that hops or flies. The Epeira has her treacherous limed net. The Spider of the bushes has her no less treacherous labyrinth. Look above the web. What a forest of ropes! It must be the rigging of a ship disabled by a storm. They run from every twig to the supporting shrubs. They are fastened to the tip of every branch. There are long ropes and short ropes, upright and slanting, straight and bent, taut and slack, all crisscross and a tangle, to the height of 3 feet or so in inextricable disorder. The whole forms a chaos of netting, a labyrinth which none can pass through, unless he be endowed with wings of exceptional power. We have here nothing similar to the lime threads used by the garden spiders. The threads are not sticky. They act only by their confused multitude. Would you care to see the trap work? Throw a small locust into the rigging. Unable to obtain a steady foothold on that shaky support, he flounders about, and the more he struggles, the more he entangles his shackles. The Spider, spying on the threshold of her abyss, lets him have his way. She does not run up the shrouds of the mastwork to seize the desperate prisoner. She waits until his bonds of threads, twisted backwards and forwards, make him fall on the web. He falls. The other comes and flings herself upon her prostrate prey. The attack is not without danger. The locust is demoralized rather than tied up. It is merely bits of broken thread that he is trailing from his legs. The bold assailant does not mind. Without troubling, like the Epeirae, to bury her capture under a paralyzing winding sheet, she feels it to make sure of its quality, and then, regardless of kicks, inserts her fangs. The bite is usually given at the lower end of a haunch. Not that this place is more vulnerable than any other thin-skinned part, but probably because it has a better flavor. The different webs which I inspect to study the food in the larder show me, among other joints, various flies and small butterflies and carcasses of almost untouched locusts, all deprived of their hind legs, or at least of one. Locusts' legs often dangle, emptied of their succulent contents, on the edges of the web, from the meat hooks of the butcher's shop. In my urchin days, days free from prejudices in regard to what one ate, I, like many others, was able to appreciate that dainty. It is the equivalent, on a very small scale, of the larger legs of the crayfish. The rigging builder, therefore, to whom we have just thrown a locust, attacks the prey at the lower end of a thigh. The bite is a lingering one. Once the Spider has planted her fangs, she does not let go. She drinks, she sips, she sucks. When this first point is drained, she passes on to others, to the second haunch in particular, until the prey becomes an empty hulk, without losing its outline. We have seen that garden spiders feed in a similar way, bleeding their venison and drinking it instead of eating it. At last, however, in the comfortable post-prandial hours, they take up the drained morsel, chew it, rechew it, and reduce it to a shapeless ball. It is dessert for the teeth to toy with. The labyrinth spider knows nothing of the diversions of the table. She flings the drained remnants out of her web without chewing them. Although it lasts long, the meal is eaten in perfect safety. From the first bite, the locust becomes a lifeless thing. The spider's poison has settled him. The labyrinth is greatly inferior as a work of art to that advanced geometrical contrivance, the garden spider's net, and in spite of its ingenuity, it does not give a favourable notion of its constructor. It is hardly more than a shapeless scaffolding run up anyhow. And yet, like the others, the builder of this slovenly edifice must have her own principles of beauty and accuracy. As it is, the prettily latticed mouth of the crater makes us suspect this. The nest, the mother's usual masterpiece, will prove it to the full. When laying time is at hand, the spider changes her residence. She abandons her web in excellent condition. She does not return to it. Whoso will can take possession of the house. The hour has come to found the family establishment. But where? The spider knows right well. I am in the dark. Mornings are spent in fruitless searches. In vain I ransack the bushes that carry the webs. I never find aught that realizes my hopes. I learn the secret at last. I chance upon a web which, though deserted, is not yet dilapidated, proving that it has been but lately quitted. Instead of hunting in the brushwood whereon it rests, let us inspect the neighborhood to a distance of a few paces. If these contain a low, thick cluster, the nest is there, hidden from the eye. It carries an authentic certificate of its origin, for the mother invariably occupies it. By this method of investigation, far from the labyrinth trap, I become the owner of as many nests as are needed to satisfy my curiosity. They do not, by a long way, come up to my idea of the maternal talent. They are clumsy bundles of dead leaves, roughly drawn together with silk threads. Under this rude covering is a pouch of fine texture containing the egg casket, all in very bad condition, because of the inevitable tears incurred in its extrication from the brushwood. No, I shall not be able to judge of the artist's capacity by these rags and tatters. The insect, in its buildings, has its own architectural rules, rules as unchangeable as anatomical peculiarities. Each group builds according to the same set of principles, conforming to the laws of a very elementary system of aesthetics. But often circumstances beyond the architect's control, the space at her disposal, the unevenness of the site, the nature of the material, and other accidental causes, interfere with the worker's plans and disturb the structure. Then virtual regularity is translated into actual chaos. Order degenerates into disorder. We might discover an interesting subject of research in the type adopted by each species when the work is accomplished without hindrances. The Banded Epeira weaves the wallet of her eggs in the open, on a slim branch that does not get in her way, and her work is a superbly artistic jar. The Silky Epeira also has all the elbow room she needs, and her paraboloid is not without elegance. Can the labyrinth spider, that other spinstress of accomplished merit, be ignorant of the precepts of beauty when the time comes for her to weave a tent for her offspring? As yet, what I have seen of her work is but an unsightly bundle. Is that all she can do? I look for better things if circumstances favor her. Toiling in the midst of a dense thicket, among a tangle of dead leaves and twigs, she may well produce a very inaccurate piece of work, but compel her to labor when free from all impediment, she will then, I am convinced of it beforehand, apply her talents without constraint and show herself an adept in the building of graceful nests. As laying time approaches, towards the middle of August, I install half a dozen labyrinth spiders in large wire gauze cages, each standing in an earthen pan filled with sand. A sprig of thyme, planted in the center, will furnish supports for the structure, together with the trellis work of the top and sides. There is no other furniture, No dead leaves, which would spoil the shape of the nest if the mother were minded to employ them as a covering. By way of provision, locusts every day. They are readily accepted, provided they be tender and not too large. The experiment works perfectly. August is hardly over before I am in possession of 6 nests, magnificent in shape and of a dazzling whiteness. The latitude of the workshop has enabled the spinstress to follow the inspiration of her instinct without serious obstacles, and the result is a masterpiece of symmetry and elegance, if we allow for a few angularities demanded by the suspension points. It is an oval of exquisite white muslin, a diaphanous abode wherein the mother must make a long stay to watch over the brood. The size is nearly that of a hen's egg. The cabin is open at either end. The front entrance broadens into a gallery. The back entrance tapers into a funnel neck. I fail to see the object of this neck. As for the opening in front, which is wider, this is, beyond a doubt, a victualling door. I see the spider, at intervals, standing here on the lookout for the locust, whom she consumes outside, taking care not to soil the spotless sanctuary with corpses. The structure of the nest is not without a certain similarity to that of the home occupied during the hunting season. The passage at the back represents the funnel neck that ran almost down to the ground and afforded an outlet for flight in case of grave danger. The one in front, expanding into a mouth kept wide open by cords stretched backwards and forwards, recalls the yawning gulf in which the victims used to fall. Every part of the old dwelling is repeated, even the labyrinth, though this, it is true, is on a much smaller scale. In front of the bell-shaped mouth is a tangle of threads wherein the passers-by are caught. Each species, in this way, possesses a primary architectural model which is followed as a whole, in spite of altered conditions. The animal knows its trade thoroughly, but it does not know and will never know aught else, being incapable of originality. Now, this palace of silk, when all is said, is nothing more than a guard-house. Behind the soft, milky opalescence of the wall glimmers the egg tabernacle, with its form vaguely suggesting the star of some order of knighthood. It is a large pocket of a splendid dead white, isolated on every side by radiating pillars which keep it motionless in the center of the tapestry. These pillars are about 10 in number and are slender in the middle, expanding at one end into a conical capital, and at the other into a base of the same shape. They face one another, and mark the possession of the vaulted corridors which allow free movement in every direction around the central chamber. The mother walks gravely to and fro under the arches of her cloisters. She stops first here, then there. She makes a lengthy auscultation of the egg wallet. She listens to all that happens inside the satin wrapper. To disturb her would be barbarous. For a closer examination, let us use the dilapidated nests which we brought from the fields. Apart from its pillars, the egg pocket is an inverted conoid, reminding us of the work of the silky Epeira. Its material is rather stout. My pincers, pulling at it, do not tear it without difficulty. Inside the bag there is nothing but an extremely fine white wadding, and lastly the eggs, numbering about 100, and comparatively large, for they measure 1.5 millimeters. Translator's footnote, 0.059 inch. End of footnote. They are very pale amber-yellow beads, which do not stick together, and which roll freely as soon as I remove the swan's down shroud. Let us put everything into a glass tube to study the hatching. We will now retrace our steps a little. When laying time comes, the mother forsakes her dwelling, her crater into which her falling victims dropped, her labyrinth in which the flight of the midges was cut short. She leaves intact the apparatus that enabled her to live at her ease. Thoughtful of her natural duties, she goes to found another establishment at a distance. Why at a distance? She has still a few long months to live, and she needs nourishment. Were it not better, then, to lodge the eggs in the immediate neighborhood of the present home, and to continue her hunting with the excellent snare at her disposal? The watching of the nest and the easy acquisition of provender would go hand in hand. The spider is of another opinion, and I suspect the reason. The sheet net and the labyrinth that surmounts it are objects visible from afar, owing to their whiteness and the height whereat they are placed. Their scintillation in the sun, in frequented paths, attracts mosquitoes and butterflies. like the lamps in our rooms and the fowler's looking-glass. Whoso comes to look at the bright thing too closely dies the victim of his curiosity. There is nothing better for playing upon the folly of the passer-by, but also nothing more dangerous to the safety of the family. Harpies will not fail to come running at this signal, showing up against the green. Guided by the position of the web, they will assuredly find the precious purse, and a strange grub, feasting on 100 new-laid eggs, will ruin the establishment. I do not know these enemies, not having sufficient materials at my disposal for a register of the parasites, but from indications gathered elsewhere I suspect them. The Banded Epeira, trusting to the strength of her stuff, fixes her nest in the sight of all, hangs it on the brushwood, taking no precautions whatever to hide it. And a bad business it proves for her. Her jar provides me with an ichneumon possessed of the inoculating larding pin, a cryptus who, as a grub, had fed on spiders' eggs. Translator's footnote: the ichneumon flies are very small insects which carry long ovipositors, wherewith they lay their eggs in the eggs of other insects, and also, more especially, in caterpillars. Their parasitic larvae live and develop at the expense of the egg or grub attacked, which degenerates in consequence. End of the footnote. Nothing but empty shells was left inside the central keg. The germs were completely exterminated. There are other ichneumon flies, moreover, addicted to robbing spiders' nests. A basket of fresh eggs is their offspring's regular food. Like any other, the labyrinth spider dreads the scoundrelly advent of the pick-wallet. She provides for it, and, to shield herself against it as far as possible, chooses a hiding-place outside her dwelling, far removed from the tell-tale web. When she feels her ovaries ripen, she shifts her quarters. She goes off at night to explore the neighborhood and seek a less dangerous refuge. The points selected are, by preference, the low brambles dragging along the ground, keeping their dense verdure during the winter, and crammed with dead leaves from the oaks hard by. Rosemary tufts, which gain in thickness what they lose in height on the unfostering rock, suit her particularly. This is where I usually find her nest, not without long seeking, so well is it hidden. So far there is no departure from current usage. As the world is full of creatures on the prowl for tender mouthfuls, every mother has her apprehensions. She also has her natural wisdom, which advises her to establish her family in secret places. Very few neglect this precaution. Each, in her own manner, conceals the eggs she lays. In the case of the labyrinth spider, the protection of the brood is complicated by another condition. In the vast majority of instances, the eggs, once lodged in a favorable spot, are abandoned to themselves, left to the chances of good or ill fortune. The spider of the brushwood, on the contrary, endowed with greater maternal devotion, has, like the crab spider, to mount guard over hers until they hatch. With a few threads and some small leaves joined together, the crab spider builds, above her lofty nest, a rudimentary watchtower, where she stays permanently, greatly emaciated, flattened into a sort of wrinkled shell through the emptying of her ovaries and the total absence of food. And this mere shred, hardly more than a skin that persists in living without eating, stoutly defends her egg sac, shows fight at the approach of any tramp. She does not make up her mind to die until the little ones are gone. The labyrinth spider is better treated. After laying her eggs, so far from becoming thin, she preserves an excellent appearance and a round belly. Moreover, she does not lose her appetite, and is always prepared to bleed a locust. She therefore requires a dwelling with a hunting box close to the eggs watched over. We know this dwelling, built in strict accordance under artistic canons under the shelter of my cages. Remember the magnificent oval guard-room, running into a vestibule at either end. The egg chamber slung in the center and isolated on every side by half a score of pillars, the front hall expanding into a wide mouth and surmounted by a network of taut threads forming a trap. The semi-transparency of the walls allows us to see the spider engaged in her household affairs. Her cloister of vaulted passages enables her to proceed to any point of the star-shaped pouch containing the eggs. Indefatigable in her rounds, she stops here and there. She fondly feels the satin, listens to the secrets of the wallet. If I shake the net at any point with a straw, she quickly runs up to inquire what is happening. Will this vigilance frighten off the ichneumon and other lovers of omelettes? Perhaps so. But though this danger be averted, others will come when the mother is no longer there. Her attentive watch does not make her overlook her meals. One of the locusts, whereof I renew the supply at intervals in the cages, is caught in the cords of the great entrance hall. The spider arrives hurriedly, snatches the giddy pate, and disjoints his shanks, which she empties of their contents, the best part of the insect. The remainder of the carcass is afterwards drained, more or less, according to her appetite at the time. The meal is taken outside the guard-room, on the threshold, never indoors. These are not capricious mouthfuls, serving to beguile the boredom of the watch for a brief while. They are substantial repasts, which require several sittings. Such an appetite astonishes me, after I have seen the crab spider, that no less ardent watcher refuse the bees whom I give her and allow herself to die of inanition. Can this other mother have so great a need as that to eat? Yes, certainly she has, and for an imperative reason. At the beginning of her work, she spent a large amount of silk, perhaps all that her reserves contained. For the double dwelling, for herself and for her offspring, is a huge edifice, exceedingly costly in materials. And yet, for nearly another month, I see her adding layer upon layer, both to the wall of the large cabin and to that of the central chamber, so much so that the texture, which at first was translucent gauze, becomes opaque satin. The walls never seem thick enough. The spider is always working at them. To satisfy this lavish expenditure, she must incessantly, by means of feeding, fill her silk glands as and when she empties them by spinning. Food is the means whereby she keeps the inexhaustible factory going. A month passes, and about the middle of September the little ones hatch, but without leaving their tabernacle, where they are to spend the winter packed in soft wadding. The mother continues to watch and spin, lessening her activity from day to day. She recruits herself with a locust at longer intervals. She sometimes scorns those whom I myself entangle in her trap. This increasing abstemiousness, a sign of decrepitude, slackens, and at last stops the work of the spinnerets. For 4 or 5 weeks longer the mother never ceases her leisurely inspection rounds, happy at hearing the newborn spiders swarming in the wallet. At length, when October ends, she clutches her offspring's nursery and dies withered. She has done all that maternal devotion can do. The special providence of tiny animals will do the rest. When spring comes, the youngsters will emerge from their snug habitation, disperse all over the neighborhood by the expedient of the floating thread, and weave their first attempts at a labyrinth on the tufts of thyme. Accurate in structure and neat in silkwork though they be, the nests of the caged captives do not tell us everything. We must go back to what happens in the fields, with their complicated conditions. Towards the end of December, I again set out in search, aided by all my youthful collaborators. We inspect the stunted rosemaries along the edge of a path sheltered by a rocky, wooded slope. We lift the branches that spread over the ground. Our zeal is rewarded with success. In a couple of hours I am the owner of some nests. Pitiful pieces of work are they, injured beyond recognition by the assaults of the weather. It needs the eyes of faith to see in these ruins the equivalent of the edifices built inside my cages. Fastened to the creeping branch, the unsightly bundle lies on the sand heaped up by the rains. Oak leaves, roughly joined by a few threads, wrap it all round. One of these leaves, larger than the others, roofs it in and serves as a scaffolding for the whole of the ceiling. If we did not see the silky remnants of the 2 vestibules projecting, and feel a certain resistance when separating the parts of the bundle, we might take the thing for a casual accumulation, the work of the rain and the wind. Let us examine our find, and look more closely into its shapelessness. Here is the large room, the maternal cabin, which rips as the coating of leaves is removed. Here are the circular galleries of the guard-room. Here are the central chamber and its pillars, all in a fabric of immaculate white. The dirt from the damp ground has not penetrated to this dwelling, protected by its wrapper of dead leaves. Now, open the habitation of the offspring. What is this? To my utter amazement, the contents of the chamber are a kernel of earthy matters, as though the muddy rain-water had been allowed to soak through. Put aside that idea, says the satin wall, which itself is perfectly clean inside. It is most certainly the mother's doing, a deliberate piece of work, executed with minute care. The grains of sand are stuck together with a cement of silk, and the whole resists the pressure of the fingers. If we continue to unshell the kernel, we find, below this mineral layer, a last silken tunic that forms a globe around the brood. No sooner do we tear this final covering than the frightened little ones run away and scatter with an agility that is singular at this cold and torpid season. To sum up, when working in the natural state, the labyrinth spider builds around the eggs, between two sheets of satin, a wall composed of a great deal of sand and a little silk. To stop the ichneumons' probe and the teeth of the other ravengers, the best thing that occurred to her was this hoarding which combines the hardness of flint with the softness of muslin. This means of defense seems to be pretty frequent among spiders. Our own big house spider, Tegenaria domestica, encloses her eggs in a globule strengthened with a rind of silk and of crumbly wreckage from the mortar of the walls. Other species, living in the open under stones, work in the same way. They wrap their eggs in a mineral shell held together with silk. The same fears have inspired the same protective methods. Then how comes it that of the 5 mothers reared in my cages, not one has had recourse to the clay rampart? After all, sand abounded. The pans in which the wire gauze cover stood were full of it. On the other hand, under normal conditions, I have often come across nests without any mineral casing. These incomplete nests were placed at some height from the ground, in the thick of the brushwood. The others, on the contrary, those supplied with a coating of sand, lay on the ground. The method of the work explains these differences. The concrete of our buildings is obtained by the simultaneous manipulation of gravel and mortar. In the same way, the spider mixes the cement of the silk with the grains of sand. The spinnerets never cease working, while the legs fling under the adhesive spray the solid materials collected in the immediate neighborhood. The operation would be impossible if, after cementing each grain of sand, it were necessary to stop the work of the spinnerets and go to a distance to fetch further stony elements. Those materials have to be right under her legs, otherwise the spider does without, and continues her work just the same. In my cages, the sand is too far off. To obtain it, the spider would have to leave the top of the dome where the nest is being built on its trellis-work support. She would have to come down some 9 inches. The worker refuses to take this trouble, which, if repeated in the case of each grain, would make the action of the spinnerets too irksome. She also refuses to do so when, for reasons which I have not fathomed, the site chosen is some way up in the tuft of rosemary. But when the nest touches the ground, the clay rampart is never missing. Are we to see in this fact proof of an instinct capable of modification, either making for decadence or gradually neglecting what was the ancestor's safeguard, or making for progress and advancing hesitatingly towards perfection in the mason's art? No inference is permissible in either direction. The labyrinth spider has simply taught us that instinct possesses resources which are employed or left latent according to the conditions of the moment. Place sand under her legs, and the spinstress will need concrete. Refuse her that sand, or put it out of her reach, and the spider will remain a simple silk worker, always ready, however, to turn mason under favorable conditions. The aggregate of things that come within the observer's scope proves that it were mad to expect from her any further innovations, such as would utterly change her methods of manufacture and cause her, for instance, to abandon her cabin, with its 2 entrance halls and its star-like tabernacle, in favor of the Banded Epeira's pear-shaped gourd. End of chapter 15. The Labyrinth Spider.
Of The Life of the Spider. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by James Christopher. The Life of the Spider by J. Henri Fabre. Translated by Alexander D'Amato. Chapter 16. The Clotho Spider.
She is named Durand's Clotho, Clotho durandi, in memory of him who first called attention to this particular spider. To enter on eternity under the safe conduct of a diminutive animal which saves us from speedy oblivion under the mallows and rocks is no contemptible advantage. Most men disappear without leaving an echo to repeat their name. They lie buried in forgetfulness, the worst of graves. Others, among the naturalists, benefit by the designation given to this or that object in life's treasure house. It is the skiff wherein they keep afloat for a brief while. A patch of lichen on the bark of an old tree, a blade of grass, a puny beastie. Any one of these hands down a man's name to posterity as effectively as a new comet. For all its abuses, this manner of honoring the departed is eminently respectable. If we would carve an epitaph of some duration, what could we find better than a beetle's wing case, a snail's shell, or a spider's web? Granite is worth none of them. Entrusted to the hard stone, an inscription becomes obliterated. Entrusted to a butterfly's wing, it is indestructible. Durand, therefore, by all means. But why drag in Clotho? Is it the whim of a nomenclator at a loss for words to denote the ever-swelling tide of beasts that require cataloguing? Not entirely. A mythological name came to his mind, one which sounded well and which, moreover, was not out of place in designating a spinstress. The Clotho of antiquity is the youngest of the three fates. She holds the distaff whence our destinies are spun. A distaff wound with plenty of rough flocks, just a few shreds of silk, and very rarely, a thin strand of gold. Prettily shaped and clad, as far as a spider can be, the Clotho of the naturalist is, above all, a highly talented spinstress, and this is the reason why she is called after the distaff-bearing deity of the infernal regions. It is a pity that the analogy extends no further. The mythological Clotho, niggardly with her silk and lavish with her coarse flocks, spins us a harsh existence. The eight-legged Clotho uses naught but exquisite silk. She works for herself, the other works for us, who are hardly worth the trouble. Would we make her acquaintance? On the rocky slopes in the olive land, scorched and blistered by the sun, turn over the flat stones, those of a fair size, search, above all, the piles which the shepherds set up for a seat whence to watch the sheep browsing amongst the lavender below. Do not be too easily disheartened. The Clotho is rare. Not every spot suits her. If fortune smile at last upon our perseverance, we shall see, clinging from the lower surface of the stone which we have lifted, an edifice of weather-beaten aspect, shaped like an overturned cupola and about the size of half a tangerine orange. The outside is encrusted or hung with small shells, particles of earth, and, especially, dried insects. The edge of the cupola is scalloped into a dozen angular lobes, the points of which spread and are fixed to the stone. In between these straps is the same number of spacious inverted arches. The whole represents the Ishmaelite's camel-hair tent, but upside down. A flat roof, stretched between the straps, closes the top of the dwelling. Then where is the entrance? All the arches of the edge open upon the roof. Not one leads into the interior. The eye seeks in vain. There is nothing to point to a passage between the inside and the outside. Yet the owner of the house must go out from time to time, were it only in search of food. On returning from her expedition, she must go in again. How does she make her exits and her entrances? A straw will tell us the secret. Pass it over the threshold of the various arches. Everywhere the searching straw encounters resistance. Everywhere it finds the place rigorously closed. But one of the scallops, differing in no wise from the others in appearance, if cleverly coaxed, opens at the edge into two lips and stands slightly ajar. This is the door, which at once shuts down again of its own elasticity. Nor is this all. The spider, when she returns home, often bolts herself in. That is to say, she joins and fastens the two leaves of the door with a little silk. The mason mygale is no safer in her burrow, with its lead indistinguishable from the soil and moving on a hinge, than is the Clotho in her tent, which is inviolate by any enemy ignorant of the device. The Clotho, when in danger, runs quickly home. She opens the chink with a touch of her claw, enters, and disappears. The door closes of itself, and is supplied, in case of need, with a lock consisting of a few threads. No burglar, led astray by the multiplicity of arches, one and all alike, will ever discover how the fugitive vanished so suddenly. While the Clotho displays a more simple ingenuity as regards her defensive machinery, she is incomparably ahead of the Mygale in matter of domestic comfort. Let us open her cabin. What luxury! We are taught of how a Sybarite of old was unable to rest, owing to the presence of a crumpled rose leaf in his bed. The Clotho is quite as fastidious. Her couch is more delicate than swan's down, and whiter than the fleece of the clouds where brood the summer storms. It is the ideal blanket. Above is a canopy or tester of equal softness. Between the two nestles a spider, short-legged, clad in sombre garments, with 5 yellow favours on her back. Rest in this exquisite retreat demands perfect stability, especially on gusty days, when sharp draughts penetrate beneath the stone. This condition is admirably fulfilled. Take a careful look at the habitation. The arches that grid the roof with a balustrade and bear the weight of the edifice are fixed to the slab by their extremities. Moreover, from each point of contact there issues a cluster of diverging threads that creep along the stone and cling to it throughout their length, which spreads afar. I have measured some fully 9 inches long. These are so many cables. They represent the ropes and pegs that holds the Arab's tent in position. With such supports as these, so numerous and so methodically arranged, the hammock cannot be torn from its bearing, save by the intervention of brutal methods which the spider need not concern herself, so seldom do they occur. Another detail attracts our attention. Whereas the interior of the house is exquisitely clean, the outside is covered with dirt, bits of earth, chips of rotten wood, little pieces of gravel. Often there are worse things still. The exterior of the tent becomes a charnel house. Here, hung up or embedded, are the dry carcasses of the Opatra, Acidae, and other Tenebriandae, that favor the underside shelters. Segments of Iuli, bleached by the sun, shells of pupae, common among the stones, and lastly, snail shells, selected from among the smallest. These relics are obviously, for the most part, table leavings, broken victuals. Unversed in the trapper's art, the Clotho courses her game, and lives upon the vagrants who wander from one stone to another. Whoso ventures under the slab at night is strangled by the hostess, and the dried-up carcass, instead of being flung to a distance, is hung to the silken wall, as though the spider wished to make a boogie house of her home. But this cannot be her aim. To act like the ogre who hangs his victims from the castle battlements is the worst way to disarm suspicion in the passers-by whom you are lying in wait to capture. There are other reasons which increase our doubts. The shells hung up are most often empty, but there are also some occupied by the snail, alive and untouched. What can the Clotho do with a pupa cinerea, a pupa quaderans, and other narrow spirals wherein the animal retreats to an inaccessible depth? The spider is incapable of breaking the calcareous shell or of getting at the hermit through the opening. Then why should she collect those prizes, whose slimy flesh is probably not to her taste? We begin to suspect a simple question of ballast and balance. The house spider, or Tegenaria domestica, prevents her web, spun in the corner of the wall, from losing its shape at the least breath of air, by loading it with crumbling plaster and allowing tiny fragments of mortar to accumulate. Are we face to face with a similar process? Let us try experiment, which is preferable to any amount of conjecture. To rear the Clotho is not an arduous undertaking. We are not obliged to take the heavy flagstone on which the dwelling is built away with us. A very simple operation suffices. I loosen the fastenings with my pocket knife. The spider has such stay-at-home ways that she very rarely makes off. Besides, I use the utmost discretion in my rape of the house, and so I carry away the building, together with its owner, in a paper bag. The flat stones, which are too heavy to move, and which would occupy too much room upon my table, are replaced either by deal discs, which once formed part of cheese boxes, or by round pieces of cardboard. I arrange each silken hammock under one of these by itself, fastening the angular projections, one by one, with strips of gum paper. The whole stands on 3 short pillars, and gives a very fair imitation of the underrock shelter in the form of a small dolmen. Throughout this operation, if you are careful to avoid shocks and jolts, the spider remains indoors. Finally, each apparatus is placed under a wire gauze, bell-shaped cage, which stands in a dish filled with sand. We can have an answer by the next morning. If, among the cabins swung from the ceilings of the deal or cardboard dolmens, there be one that is all dilapidated, that was seriously knocked out of shape at the time of removal, the spider abandons it during the night, and installs herself elsewhere, sometimes even on the trellis work of the wire cage. The new tent, the work of a few hours, attains hardly the diameter of a 2-franc piece. It is built, however, on the same principles as the old manor house, and consists of 2 thin sheets laid one above the other, the upper one flat and forming a tester, the lower curved and pocket-shaped. The texture is extremely delicate. The least trifle would deform it, to the detriment of the available space, which is already much reduced and only just sufficient for the recluse. Well, what has the Spider done to keep the gossamer stretched, to steady it and make it retain its greatest capacity? Exactly what our static treatises would advise her to do. She has ballasted her structure. She has done her best to lower its center of gravity. From the convex surface of the pocket hang long chaplets of grains of sand strung together with slender silken cords. To these sandy stalactites, which form a bushy beard, are added a few heavy lumps hung separately and lower down at the end of a thread. The whole is a piece of ballast work, an apparatus for ensuring equilibrium and tension. The present edifice, hastily constructed in the space of a night, is the frail rough sketch of what the home will afterwards become. Successive layers will be added to it, and the partition wall will grow into a thick blanket capable of partially retaining, by its own weight, the requisite curve and capacity. The Spider now abandons the stalactites of sand, which were used to keep the original pocket stretched, and confines herself to dumping down on her abode any more or less heavy object, mainly corpses of insects, because she need not look for these, and finds them ready to hand after each meal. They are weights, not trophies. They take the place of materials that must otherwise be collected from a distance and hoisted to the top. In this way, a breastwork is obtained that strengthens and steadies the house. Additional equilibrium is often supplied by tiny shells and other objects hanging a long way down. What would happen if one robbed an old dwelling, long since completed, of its outer covering? In case of such a disaster, would the Spider go back to the sandy stalactites as a ready means of restoring stability? This is easily ascertained. In my hamlets under wire, I select a fair-sized cabin. I strip the exterior, carefully removing any foreign body. The silk reappears in its original whiteness. The tent looks magnificent, but seems to me too limp. This is also the Spider's opinion. She sets to work, next evening, to put things right. And how? Once more with hanging strings of sand. In a few nights, the silk bag bristles with a long, thick beard of stalactites, a curious piece of work, excellently adapted to maintain the web in an unvaried curve. Even so are the cables of a suspension bridge steadied by the weight of the superstructure. Later, as the Spider goes on feeding, the remains of the victuals are embedded in the wall, the sand is shaken, and gradually drops away, and the home resumes its charnel house appearance. This brings us to the same conclusion as before. The Clotho knows her statics. By means of additional weights, she is able to lower the center of gravity, and thus give her dwelling the proper equilibrium and capacity. Now what does she do in her softly wadded home? Nothing that I know of. With a full stomach, her legs luxuriously stretched over the downy carpet, she does nothing, thinks of nothing. She listens to the sound of earth revolving on its axis. It is not sleep, still less it is waking. It is a middle state where naught prevails save a dreamy consciousness of well-being. We ourselves, when comfortably in bed, enjoy, just before we fall asleep, a few moments of bliss, the prelude to cessation of thought and its train of worries, and those moments are among the sweetest in our lives. The Clotho seems to know similar moments and to make the most of them. If I push open the door of the cabin, invariably I find the Spider lying motionless, as though in endless meditation. It needs the teasing of a straw to rouse her from her apathy. It needs the prick of hunger to bring her out of doors, and, as she is extremely temperate, her appearances outside are few and far between. During 3 years of assiduous observation, in the privacy of my study, I have not once seen her explore the domain of the wire cage by day. Not until a late hour at night does she venture forth in quest of victuals, and it is hardly feasible to follow her on her excursions. Patience once enabled me to find her, at 10 o'clock in the evening, taking the air on the flat roof of her house, where she was doubtless waiting for the game to pass. Startled by the light of my candle, the lover of darkness at once returned indoors, refusing to reveal any of her secrets. Only next day there was one more corpse hanging from the wall of her cabin, a proof that the chase was successfully resumed after my departure. The Clotho, who is not only nocturnal but also excessively shy, conceals her habits from us. She shows us her works, those precious historical documents, but hides her actions, especially the laying, which I estimate approximately to take place in October. The sum total of the eggs is divided into 5 or 6 small, flat, lentiform pockets, which, taken together, occupy the greater part of the maternal home. These capsules each have their own partition wall, of superb white satin, but they are so closely soldered, both together and to the floor of the house, that it is impossible to part them without tearing them, impossible, therefore, to obtain them separately. The eggs in all amount to about 100. The mother sits upon the heap of pockets with the same devotion as a brooding hen. Maternity has not withered her. Although decreased in bulk, she retains an excellent look of health. Her round belly and her well-stretched skin tell us from the first that her part is not yet wholly played. The hatching takes place early. November has not arrived before the pockets contain the young. Wee things clad in black, with 5 yellow specks, exactly like their elders. The newborn do not leave their respective nurseries. Packed close together, they spend the whole of the wintry season there, while the mother, squatting on the pile of cells, watches over the general safety, without knowing her family other than by the gentle trepidations felt through the partitions of the tiny chambers. The labyrinth spider has shown us how she maintains a permanent sitting for 2 months in her guard-room, to defend, in case of need, the brood which she will never see. The Clotho does the same thing during 8 months, thus earning the right to set eyes for a little while on her family, trotting around her in the main cabin and to assist in the final exodus, the great journey undertaken at the end of a thread. When the summer heat arrives in June, the young ones, probably aided by their mother, pierce the walls of their cells, leave the maternal tent of which they know the secret outlet well, take the air on the threshold for a few hours, and then fly away, carried to some distance by a funicular aeroplane, the first product of their spinning mill. The elder Clotho remains behind, careless of this emigration which leaves her alone. She is far from being faded. Indeed, she looks younger than ever. Her fresh color, her robust appearance suggest great length of life, capable of producing a second family. On this subject I have but one document, a pretty far-reaching one, however. There were a few mothers, whose actions I had the patience to watch, despite the wearisome minutiae of the rearing and the slowness of the result. These abandoned their dwellings after the departure of their young, and each went to weave a new one for herself on the wired network of the cage. They were rough and ready summaries, the work of a night. 2 hangings, one above the other, the upper one flat, the lower concave and ballasted with stalactites of grain and sand, formed the new home, which, strengthened daily by fresh layers, promised to become similar to the old one. Why does the spider desert her former mansion, which is in no way dilapidated, far from it, and still exceedingly serviceable, as far as one can judge? Unless I am mistaken, I think I have an inkling of the reason. The old cabin, comfortably wadded though it be, possesses serious disadvantages. It is littered with the ruins of the children's nurseries. These ruins are so close welded to the rest of the home that my forceps cannot extract them without difficulty, and to remove them would be an exhausting business for the Clotho, and possibly beyond her strength. It is a case of the resistance of Gordian knots, which not even the very spinstress who fastened them is capable of untying. The encumbering litter, therefore, will remain. If the spider were to stay at home, the reduction of space, when all is said, would hardly matter to her. She wants so little room, merely enough to move in. Besides, when you have spent 7 or 8 months in the cramping presence of those bedchambers, what can be the reason of a sudden need for greater space? I see but one. The spider requires roomy habitation, not for herself. She is satisfied with the smallest den, but for a second family. Where is she to place the pockets of eggs, if the ruins of the previous laying remain in the way? A new brood requires a new home. That no doubt is why, feeling that her ovaries are not yet dried up, the spider shifts her quarters and founds a new establishment. The facts observed are confined to this change of dwelling. I regret that other interests, and the difficulties attendant upon a long upbringing, did not allow me to pursue the question and definitely to settle the matter of the repeated layings and longevity of the Clotho, as I did in that of the Lycosa. Before taking leave of this spider, let us glance at the curious problem which has already been set by the Lycosa's offspring. When carried for 7 months on the mother's back, they keep in training as agile gymnasts without taking any nourishment. It is a familiar exercise for them, after a fall, which frequently occurs, to scramble up a leg of their mount and nimbly to resume their place in the saddle. They expend energy without receiving any material sustenance. The sons of the Clotho, the labyrinth spider, and many others confront us with the same riddle. They move, yet do not eat. At any period of the nursery stage, even in the heart of winter, in the bleak days of January, I tear the pockets of one and the tabernacle of the other, expecting to find the swarm of youngsters lying in a state of complete inertia, numbed by the cold and by lack of food. Well, the result is quite different. The instant their cells are broken open, the anchorites run out and flee in every direction as nimbly as at the best moments of their normal liberty. It is marvelous to see them scampering about. No brood of partridges, stumbled upon by a dog, scatters more promptly. Chicks, while still no more than tiny balls of yellow fluff, hasten up at the mother's call and scurry towards the plate of rice. Habit has made us indifferent to the spectacle of those pretty little animal machines, which work so nimbly and with such precision. We pay no attention. So simple does it all appear to us. Science examines and looks at things differently. She says to herself, "Nothing is made with nothing. The chick feeds itself, it consumes, or rather it assimilates and turns the food into heat, which is converted into energy." Were anyone to tell us of a chick which, for 7 or 8 months on end, kept itself in condition for running, always fit, always brisk, without taking the least beakful of nourishment from the day when it left the egg, we could find no words strong enough to express our incredulity. Now, this paradox of activity, maintained without the stay of food, is realized by the Clotho spider and others. I believe I have made it sufficiently clear that the young Lycosae take no food as long as they remain with their mother. Strictly speaking, doubt is just admissible, for observation is needs dumb as to what may happen earlier or later within the mysteries of the burrow. It seems possible that the repleted mother may there disgorge to her family a mite of the contents of her crop. To this suggestion the Clotho undertakes to make reply. Like the Lycosa, she lives with her family, but the Clotho is separated from them by the walls of the cells in which the little ones are hermetically enclosed. In this condition, the transmission of solid nourishment becomes impossible. Should anyone entertain a theory of nutritive humors cast up by the mother and filtering through the partitions at which the prisoners might come and drink, the labyrinth spider would at once dispel the idea. She dies a few weeks after her young are hatched, and the children, still locked in their satin bedchamber for the best part of a year, are none the less active. Can it be that they derive sustenance from the silken wrapper? Do they eat their house? The supposition is not absurd, for we have seen the Euphorae, before beginning a new web, swallow the ruins of the old. But the explanation cannot be accepted, as we learn from the Lycosa, whose family boasts no silky screen. In short, it is certain that the young, of whatever species, take absolutely no nourishment. Lastly, we wonder whether they may possess, within themselves, reserves that come from the egg, fatty or other matters, the gradual combustion of which would be transformed into mechanical force. If the expenditure of energy were of but short duration, a few hours or a few days, we could gladly welcome this idea of a motor viaticum, the attribute of every creature born into the world. The chick possesses it in a high degree. It is steady on its legs. It moves for a little while with the sole aid of the food wherewith the egg furnishes it. But soon, if the stomach is not kept supplied, the center of energy becomes extinct, and the bird dies. How would the chick fare if it were expected, for 7 or 8 months without stopping, to stand on its feet, to run about, to flee in the face of danger? Where would it stow the necessary reserves for such an amount of work? The little spider, in her turn, is a minute particle of no size at all. Where could she store enough fuel to keep up mobility during so long a period? The imagination shirks in dismay before the thought of an atom endowed with inexhaustible motive oils. We must needs, therefore, appeal to the immaterial, in particular to heat rays coming from the outside and converted into movement by the organism. This is nutrition of energy reduced to its simplest expression. The motive heat, instead of being extracted from the food, is utilized direct, as supplied by the sun, which is the seat of all life. Inert matter has disconcerting secrets, as witness radium. Living matter has secrets of its own, which are more wonderful still. Nothing tells us that science will not one day turn the suspicion suggested by the spider into an established truth and a fundamental theory of physiology.
End of chapter 16.
The Life of the Spider by Jean-Henri Fabre. Translated by Alexander D'Amato. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by James Christopher. The Life of the Spider, Appendix. I find myself confronted with a subject which is not only highly interesting, but somewhat difficult. Not that the subject is obscure, but it presupposes in the reader a certain knowledge of geometry, a strong meat too often neglected. I am not addressing geometricians, who are generally indifferent to questions of instinct, nor entomological collectors, who, as such, take no interest in mathematical theorems. I write for anyone with sufficient intelligence to enjoy the lessons which the insect teaches. What am I to do? To suppress this chapter were to leave out the most remarkable instance of spider industry. To treat it as it should be treated, that is to say, with the whole armory of scientific formula, would be out of place in these modest pages. Let us take a middle course, avoiding both abstruse truths and complete ignorance. Let us direct our attention to the nets of the Epeirae, preferably to those of the silky Epeira and the banded Epeira, so plentiful in the autumn in my part of the country, and so remarkable for their bulk. We shall first observe that the radii are equally spaced. The angles formed by each consecutive pair are of perceptually equal value, and this in spite of their number, which in the case of the silky Epeira exceeds 20. We know by what strange means the spider attains her ends, and divides the area wherein the web is to be warped into a large number of equal sectors, a number which is almost invariable in the work of each species. An operation without method, governed, one might imagine, by an irresponsible whim, results in a beautiful rose window worthy of our compasses. We shall also notice that, in each sector, the various chords, the elements of the spiral windings, are parallel to one another, and gradually draw closer together as they near the center. With the two radiating lines that frame them, they form obtuse angles on one side and acute angles on the other, and these angles remain constant in the same sector, because the chords are parallel. There is more than this. These same angles, the obtuse as well as the acute, do not alter in value from one sector to another, at any rate so far as the conscientious eye can judge. Taken as a whole, therefore, the rope-latticed edifice consists of a series of crossbars, intersecting the several radiating lines obliquely at angles of equal value. By this characteristic we recognize the logarithmic spiral. Geometricians give this name to the curve which intersects obliquely, at angles of unvarying value, all the straight lines of radii vectors, radiating from the center, called the pole. The Epeira's construction, therefore, is a series of chords joining the intersections of a logarithmic spiral with a series of radii. It would become merged in this spiral if the number of radii were infinite, for this would reduce the length of the rectilinear elements indefinitely and change this polygonal line into a curve. To suggest an explanation why this spiral has so greatly exercised the meditations of science, let us confine ourselves for the present to a few statements of which the reader will find the proof in any treatise on higher geometry. The logarithmic spiral describes an endless number of circuits around its pole, to which it constantly draws nearer without ever being able to reach it. This central point is indefinitely inaccessible at each approaching turn. It is obvious that this property is beyond our sensory scope. Even with the help of the best philosophical instruments, our sight could not follow its interminable windings and would soon abandon the attempt to divide the invisible. It is a volute to which the brain conceives no limits. The trained mind alone, more discerning than our retina, sees clearly that which defies the perceptive faculties of the eye. The Epeira complies to the best of her ability with this law of the endless volute. The spiral revolutions come closer together as they approach the pole. At a given distance, they stop abruptly, but, at this point, the auxiliary spiral, which is not destroyed in the central region, takes up the thread, and we see it, not without some surprise, draw nearer to the pole in ever narrowing and scarcely perceptible circles. There is not, of course, absolute mathematical accuracy, but a very close approximation to that accuracy. The Epeira winds nearer and nearer round her pole, so far as her equipment, which, like our own, is defective, will allow her. One would believe her to be thoroughly versed in the laws of the spiral. I will continue to set forth, without explanation, some of the properties of this curious curve. Picture a flexible thread wound round a logarithmic spiral. If we then unwind it, keeping it taut the while, its free extremity will describe a spiral similar at all points to the original. The curve will merely have changed places. Jacques Bernoulli, to whom geometry owes this magnificent theorem, has engraved on his tomb, as one of his proudest titles to fame, one of the generating spiral and its double, begotten of the unwinding of the thread. An inscription proclaimed, Idem mutata resurgo, I rise again like unto myself. Geometry would find it difficult to better this splendid flight of fancy towards the great problem of the hereafter. There is another geometrical epitaph no less famous. Cicero, when quaestor in Sicily, searching for the tomb of Archimedes amid the thorns and brambles that cover us with oblivion, recognized it, among the ruins, by the geometrical figure engraved upon the stone, the cylinder circumscribing the sphere. Archimedes, in fact, was the first to know the approximate relation of circumference to diameter. From it he deduced the perimeter and surface of the circle, as well as the surface of the volume of the sphere. He showed that the surface and volume of the last named equaled 2/3 of the surface and volume of the circumscribing cylinder. Disdaining all pompous inscription, the learned Syracusan honored himself with his theorem as his sole epitaph. The geometrical figure proclaimed the individual's name as plainly as would any alphabetical characters. To have done with this part of our subject, here is another property of the logarithmic spiral. Roll the curve along an indefinite straight line. Its pole will become displaced while still keeping one straight line. The endless scroll leads to rectilinear progression. The perceptually varied begets uniformity. Now is this logarithmic spiral, with its curious properties, merely a conception of the geometers, combining number and extent at will, so as to imagine a tenebrous abyss wherein to practice their analytical methods afterwards? Is it a mere dream in the night of the intricate, an abstract riddle flung out for our understanding to browse upon? No, it is a reality in the service of life, a method of construction frequently employed in animal architecture. The mollusk, in particular, never rolls the winding ramp of the shell without reference to the scientific curve. The firstborn of the species knew it and put it into practice. It was as perfect in the dawn of creation as it can be today. Let us study in this connection the ammonites, those venerable relics of what was once the highest expression of living things, at the time when the solid land was taking shape from the oceanic ooze. Cut and polished lengthwise, the fossil shows a magnificent logarithmic spiral, the general pattern of the dwelling which was a pearl palace, with numerous chambers traversed by a siphuncular corridor. To this day, the last representative of the cephalopodia with partitioned shells, the nautilus of the southern seas, remains faithful to the ancient design. It has not improved upon its distant predecessors. It has altered the position of the siphuncle, has placed it in the center instead of leaving it on the back, but it still whirls its spiral logarithmically, as did the ammonites in the earliest ages of the world's existence. And let us not run away with the idea that these princes of the mollusk tribe have a monopoly of the scientific curve. In the stagnant waters of our grassy ditches, the flat shells, the humble planorbis, sometimes no bigger than a duckweed, vie with the ammonite and the nautilus in matters of higher geometry. At least one of them, Planorbis vortex for example, is a marvel of logarithmic whirls. In the long-shaped shells, the structure becomes more complex, though remaining subject to the same fundamental laws. I have before my eyes some species of the genus Terebra, from New Caledonia. They are extremely tapering cones, attaining almost 9 inches in length. Their surface is smooth and quite plain, without any of the usual ornaments such as furrows, knots, or strings of pearls. The spiral edifice is superb, graced with its own simplicity alone. I count a score of whorls, which gradually decrease until they vanish in the delicate point. They are edged with a fine groove. I take a pencil and draw a rough generating line to this cone, and relying merely on the evidence of my eyes, which are more or less practiced in geometric measurements, I find that the spiral groove intersects this generating line at an angle of unvarying value. The consequence of this result is easily deduced. If projected on a plane perpendicular to the axis of the shell, the generating lines of the cone would become radii, and the groove which winds upwards from the base to the apex would be converted into a plane curve, which, meeting those radii at an unvarying angle, would be neither more nor less than a logarithmic spiral. Conversely, the groove of the shell may be considered as the projection of this spiral on a conic surface. Better still, let us imagine a plane perpendicular to the aids of the shell and passing through its summit. Let us imagine, moreover, a thread wound along the spiral groove. Let us unroll the thread, holding it taut as we do so. Its extremity will not leave the plane, and will describe a logarithmic spiral within it. It is, in a more complicated degree, a variant of Bernoulli's eadem mutata resurgo. The logarithmic conic curve becomes a logarithmic plane curve. A similar geometry is found in the other shells with elongated cones. Turritelli, spindle shells, Cerithia, as well as in the shells with flattened cones. Trochidae, turbines. The spherical shells, those whirled into a volute, are no exception to this rule. All, down to the common snail shell, are constructed according to logarithmic laws. The famous spiral of the geometers is the general plan followed by the mollusk rolling its stone sheath. Where do these glairy creatures pick up this science? We are told that the mollusk derives from the worm. One day the worm, rendered frisky by the sun, emancipated itself, brandished its tail and twisted it into a corkscrew for sheer glee. There and then, the plan of the future spiral shell was discovered. This is what is taught quite seriously in these days, as the very last word in scientific progress. It remains to be seen up to what point the explanation is acceptable. The spider, for her part, will have none of it. Unrelated to the appendix-lacking, corkscrew-twirling worm, she is nevertheless familiar with the logarithmic spiral. From the celebrated curve she obtains merely a sort of framework, but elementary though this framework be, it clearly marks the ideal edifice. The Epeira works on the same principles as the mollusk of the convoluted shell. The mollusk has years wherein to construct its spiral, and it uses the utmost finish in the whirling process. The Epeira, to spread her net, has but an hour's sitting at the most, wherefore the speed at which she works compels her to rest content with a simpler production. She shortens the task by confining herself to a skeleton of the curve which the other describes to perfection. The Epeira, therefore, is versed in the geometric secrets of the ammonite and the Nautilus pompilus. She uses, in a simpler form, the logarithmic line dear to the snail. What guides her? There is no appeal here to a wriggle of some kind, as in the case of the worm that ambitiously aspires to become a mollusk. The animal must needs carry within itself a virtual diagram of its spiral. Accident, however fruitful in surprises we may presume it to be, can never have taught it the higher geometry wherein our own intelligence at once goes astray, without a strict preliminary training. Are we to recognize a mere effect of organic structure in the Epeira's art? We readily think of the legs, which, endowed with a very varying power of extension, might serve as compasses. More or less bent, more or less outstretched, they would mechanically determine the angle whereat the spiral shall intersect the radius. They would maintain the parallel of the chords in each sector. Certain objections arise to affirm that, in this instance, the tool is not the sole regulator of the work. Were the arrangement of the thread determined by the length of the legs, we should find the spiral volutes separated more widely from one another in proportion to the greater length of implement in the spinstress. We see this in the banded Epeira and the silky Epeira. The first has longer limbs and spaces her cross threads more liberally than does the second, whose legs are shorter. But we must not rely too much on this rule, say others. The angular Epeira, the pale-tinted Epeira, and the cross spider, all three more or less short-limbed, rival the banded Epeira in the spacing of their lime snares. The last two even dispose them with greater intervening distances. We recognize in another respect that the organization of the animal does not imply an immutable type of work. Before beginning the sticky spiral, the Epeirae first spin an auxiliary intended to strengthen the stays. This spiral, formed in plain non-glutinous thread, starts from the center and winds in rapidly widening circles to the circumference. It is merely a temporary construction, whereof naught but the central part survives when the spider has set its limy meshes. The second spiral, the essential part of the snare, proceeds, on the contrary, in serried coils from the circumference to the center, and is composed entirely of viscous cross-threads. Here we have, following one after the other, merely by a sudden alteration of the machine, two volutes of an entirely different order, as regards direction, the number of whirls and intersection. Both of them are logarithmic spirals. I see no mechanism of the legs, be they long or short, that can account for this alteration. Can it then be a premeditated design on the part of the Epeira? Can there be calculation, measurement of angles, gauging of the parallel by means of the eye or otherwise? I am inclined to think that there is none of all this, or at least nothing but an innate propensity, whose effects the animal has no more ability to control than the flower is able to control the arrangement of its verticals. The Epeira practices higher geometry without knowing or caring. The thing works of itself, and takes its impetus from an instinct imposed upon creation from the start. The stone thrown by the hand returns to earth describing a certain curve. The dead leaf torn and wafted away by a breath of wind makes its journey from the tree to the ground with a similar curve. On neither one side nor the other is there any action by the moving body to regulate the fall. Nevertheless, the descent takes place according to a scientific trajectory, the parabola, of which the section of a cone by a plane furnished the prototype to the geometer's speculations. A figure, which was at first but a tentative glimpse, becomes a reality by the fall of a pebble out of the vertical. The same speculations take up the parabola once more. Imagine it rolling on an infinite straight line and ask what course does the focus of this curve follow. The answer comes. The focus of the parabola describes a catenary, a line very simple in shape, but endowed with an algebraic symbol that has to resort to a kind of cabalistic number at variance with any sort of numeration. So much so that the unit refuses to express it, however we subdivide the unit. It is called the number e. Its value is represented by the following series carried out ad infinitum. E equals 1 plus 1 over 1 plus 1 divided by 1 times 2 plus 1 divided by 1 times 2 times 3 plus 1 divided by 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 plus 1 divided by 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5, etc. If the reader had the patience to work out the few initial terms of this series, which has no limit because the series of natural numerals itself has none, he would find e equals 2.7182818 to infinity. With this weird number, are we now stationed within the strictly defined realm of the imagination? Not at all. The catenary appears actually every time that weight and flexibility act in concert. The name is given to the curve formed by a chain suspended by two of its points which are not placed on a vertical line. It is the shape taken by a flexible cord when held at each end and relaxed. It is the line that governs the shape of a sail bellying in the wind. It is the curve of the nanny goat's milk bag when she returns from filling her trailing udder. And all this answers to the number e. What a quantity of abstruse science for a bit of string! Let us not be surprised. A pellet of shot swinging at the end of a thread, a drop of dew trickling down a straw, a splash of water rippling under the kisses of the air, a mere trifle after all, requires a titanic scaffolding when we wish to examine it with the eye of calculation. We need the club of Hercules to crush a fly. Our methods of mathematical investigation are certainly ingenious. We cannot too much admire the mighty brains that have invented them. But how slow and laborious they appear when compared with the smallest actualities. Will it never be given to us to probe reality in a simpler fashion? Will our intelligence be able one day to dispense with the heavy arsenal of formulae? Why not? Here we have the abracadabric number e reappearing, inscribed on a spider's thread. Let us examine, on a misty morning, the meshwork that has been constructed during the night. Owing to their hygrometrical nature, the sticky threads are laden with tiny drops, and bending under the burden have become so many catenaries, so many chaplets of lipid gems, graceful chaplets arranged in exquisite order and following the curve of a swing. If the sun pierce the mist, the whole lights up with the iridescent fires and becomes a resplendent cluster of diamonds. The number e is in its glory. Geometry, that is to say the science of harmony in space, presides over everything. We find it in the arrangement of the scales of a fir cone, as in the arrangement of an Epeira's limy web. We find it in the spiral of a snail shell, in the chaplet of a spider's thread, as in the orbit of a planet. It is everywhere as perfect in the world of atoms as in the world of immensities. And this universal geometry tells us of a universal geometrician, whose divine compass has measured all things. I prefer that, as an explanation of the logarithmic curve of the ammonite and the Epeira, to the worm screwing up the tip of its tail. It may not perhaps be in accordance with latter-day teaching, but it takes a loftier flight. End of Appendix. End of The Life of the Spider by Jean-Henri Fabre. Translated by Alexander D'Amato. Recording by James Christopher. jxchristopher@yahoo.com. Phoenix, Arizona, January 2009.